Would you believe a dog could jump into a flood just in time to save a baby who had no one left to call for help? No one even looking for her? Just a swollen river rising fast, a storm that wouldn't stop, and a baby's cries that could barely be heard over the thunder, the rushing water, the wind. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there right now? Because once you hear what happened in that little town, during the worst storm they'd seen in 30 years, you may never look at a stray dog the same way again. This story doesn't begin with chaos, though it ends with it. It begins with a quiet day, the kind that doesn't warn you of anything, a regular morning in the sleepy edge of Missouri, where an old wooden town sat between two rivers that had always threatened but never delivered. And families lived not because it was perfect, but because it was home, because their grandparents had lived there too, because you didn't just leave the place that raised you, even when the roads flooded or the power lines snapped in spring. It was just how things were. Just like the way people waved at each other in the grocery store, or how everyone knew the name of the mailman's dog, and no one locked their front doors unless they were going on vacation, and even then, only sometimes. At the corner of Walnut and Hickory, in a narrow house that leaned slightly from too many winters, a baby named Lily had just learned how to sit on her own, her hands chubby and unsure, her laugh like a squeaky gate that hadn't been oiled. The kind of laugh that made you smile even if you didn't want to. The kind of sound that filled a house with warmth. And her mother, Erin, only 23 but strong in the way only single mothers are, was doing her best, working the morning shift at the diner 2 blocks down, always home by lunch, always kissing Lily's forehead before leaving, always leaving the same note on the fridge for her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Donahue, who had agreed to watch Lily just until Erin made enough to afford daycare. That morning, Erin almost didn't go. The clouds had gathered in a way that made her chest feel tight, like something was sitting on her. And she had even turned back once from the porch, her hand resting on the doorknob, listening to the wind, whistling through the trees like a warning. But the rent was due in 4 days, and her last paycheck had barely covered the electricity. She kissed Lily twice that day. Just in case, just something about the air didn't feel right. No one knows exactly when the first creek breached, whether it was upstream at Blackwell Bend or lower down near River's Mouth. But by 9 a.m., the floodwater had begun creeping across backyards like a silent thief, dark brown, full of twigs, bottles, pieces of people's lives carried in the current, and by 10:30, it was no longer creeping. It was racing, pounding down roads, swallowing fences, pushing cars sideways like toys, turning basements into ponds and whole houses into boats. The sirens didn't come fast enough because the cell towers were out, and the storm had knocked out the weather alert system. Some families barely made it out in time. Others didn't even know they were in danger until water was already at their knees. And in the chaos, in the rush, in the screaming and shouting and honking and yelling, in the frantic grabbing of photo albums and passports and family dogs, somehow, no one noticed that the old house at Walnut and Hickory had cracked. Not from rot, not from storm, but from the weight of time and pressure and water building under its foundation like a secret. And when it collapsed, it went all at once, like a tower of matchsticks kicked by a careless foot. Erin wasn't there. Mrs. Donahue had already been evacuated 2 hours earlier by her son who lived in Springfield, thinking she'd come alone, not realizing she had promised to babysit. And in the confusion, in the storm, in the way emergencies stretch time and scatter thoughts, she had forgotten. Or maybe she hadn't heard Lily's cries from the other room, but somehow Lily had survived, her bassinet pushed by water, by the shifting foundation, by the miracle of chaos, had floated down the hallway, out the broken door, and into the street. It's the basket bumping against debris, against shingles and tires, and a shattered TV, slowly drifting like a leaf in the current. While above her, lightning split the sky, and rain pounded down like nails, and she cried, not knowing where her mother was, not knowing anything except the terror of cold and wet and noise, in motion. Oh. Not the fire truck that sped by half a block away, not the rescue boat that turned right instead of left, not the helicopter that hovered overhead but couldn't see through the trees, but someone did. Not someone in uniform, not someone with a badge or a radio or training, just a dog. A stray, nameless to most, scruffy and golden and lean, who had lived near the train yard for almost a year, but slept under porches and in sheds, who had never been claimed, never been taken in, but who had always watched the kids. Walked to school, watched the workers eat lunch outside the gas station, watched the people come and go without ever really seeing him. A silent witness to the small town's daily life, unnoticed but never unnoticing. Some people tossed him scraps, some chased him off, but he never barked, never begged. He was just there, on that day, when the wind howled louder than the sirens, and the water surged through the alley behind the bakery. That dog was there too, perched on a slanted roof that had once been a tool shed. His ears raised, his body tense, staring at something only he could hear. A cry, faint, high, barely there over the rain, but enough to make him move, to leap from the roof onto a floating crate, to run across the shifting chaos of what had once been a street, paws landing on slick metal and splintered wood without hesitation. His nose low, tracking, searching, not with panic, but with purpose. Like something had clicked inside him, something old and primal, the knowledge that someone small was in trouble, that someone needed him, even if they'd never met, even if. She didn't know what a dog was. He reached the water's edge just as the basket rounded the corner, spinning slowly, Lily wailing louder now, her little arms flailing at the sky, and the dog didn't wait, didn't think he jumped. Straight into the current, his body cutting through the flood like an arrow. Paddling hard, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the baby, closing the distance stroke by stroke, while around them the world drowned and cracked and fell apart. No one saw him yet. But this was only the beginning. They say instincts can be more powerful than knowledge, more reliable than rules or maps or even experience. And that day, when the river became a monster and the roads turned into rivers, it wasn't a rescue team or trained responder that found Lily, but a dog no one had ever really seen, not truly, not the way that matters. Yet he moved like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. His paws slicing through the brown water with purpose, his soaked fur clinging to his thin frame, eyes never leaving the crying baby in the basket just ahead of him. Bobbing between broken branches and torn clothing and things we'd all rather not describe. And as the wind roared and the current pulled harder, he kept swimming, not faster, but stronger, as if he knew speed alone wouldn't matter. As if he knew the basket could flip at any second. That one wrong wave, one piece of debris, one sudden shift in the current could tip her into the flood. She wouldn't stand a chance, not at that age, not with lungs so small and arms that couldn't even lift her own weight. And the baby cried louder now. Or maybe it only seemed that way, because everything else was quieting, like the world was holding its breath to see what would happen next. And the dog surged forward, closer now, closer than he'd ever been to anything that mattered. And finally, with one final push, against the pull of the water, he reached her, bumping his head gently against the basket, once, twice, steadying it with his nose like he was testing it, like he was checking to make sure she was real. And when she reached out with her tiny hand, not to push him away but to grab a fistful of his wet fur, something changed in him, something ancient and wordless and good. And he began nudging the basket, slow at first, finding his rhythm in the tide, pushing her from behind. Then beside her, then in front, looping around again, and again, to keep her straight, to keep her moving, and every so often she'd cry again, and he'd pause, lick her forehead quickly, and keep going. And in the distance, a roof groaned and collapsed, but the basket held, and he held. Never leaving her side, never giving up, never drifting off like 100 other things in that storm had done. A man watching from the upstairs window of a half-flooded house thought he was hallucinating, rubbing his eyes like a man in a fever dream, because there it was, a baby in a basket and a dog swimming alongside, not barking, not panicking. Just focused, just working, and he shouted, but his voice was lost in the wind. And by the time he reached the front door, they were gone again, carried past by the current. Somewhere else, another family was climbing to their roof, their teenage daughter recording the chaos on her phone for Instagram, only to lower the camera slowly when she caught sight of the dog paddling past with the baby, her eyes going wide. As she gasped and she screamed for her dad, and he screamed for someone else. But they were already 2 blocks down by the time a rescue team spotted them, and even then the dog didn't stop. You have to understand, he didn't know what a rescue boat was, didn't know the difference between good hands and bad ones. Just knew that someone small was in his care now, and that letting go wasn't an option. The firefighter in the boat, Jackson, father of 3, once saved a child from a burning trailer, would later say he'd never seen anything like it. That when they approached and tried to grab the basket, the dog growled, low and deep, not because he was angry, but because he was afraid they were there to take her somewhere worse. Afraid they wouldn't be gentle, that they wouldn't understand. And when they finally pulled her in gently, cradling her wet, shivering body in a blanket, she stopped crying for the first time, as if she somehow knew she was safe now. And the dog, too tired to swim anymore, let himself be lifted aboard without protest. Collapsing on the floor of the boat beside her, his body pressed close, his nose tucked near her tiny foot. But the story doesn't end there, because this isn't about a moment. It's about a bond. One that had just begun, and in the hours that followed. While the baby was taken to the field hospital at the high school gym and wrapped in warming, blankets and checked by 3 separate nurses and 1 shocked pediatrician who kept saying over and over, she shouldn't be alive, the dog refused to leave her side. When someone tried to separate them, a volunteer who thought he might need to be quarantined, he snarled again, weakly like a warning, and she began to cry. Not like before, not wild or frightened, but soft, like a protest, like a plea, and they let him stay. They didn't even know his name. They didn't know where he came from, what he'd seen, how he'd survived the early waves or the winds that knocked down power lines like matchsticks. But it didn't matter, because he was there now, and Lily was safe. Aaron, meanwhile, had been going door to door for hours, barefoot, soaked, hoarse from screaming, her shoes lost in the mud when she'd abandoned her shift and run the 5 blocks home only to find nothing but water, crushed porch and silence. She begged rescuers for information, described her baby over and over, her voice cracking, her hands trembling, and no one had answers. Not until she reached the gym and heard someone say, "There's a baby and a dog. You need to see this." And when she turned the corner, when she saw her daughter wrapped in towels on a cot, with a muddy golden dog curled beside her like a guardian angel with fur, she fell to her knees. Sobbing so hard it hurt the people watching, and Lily looked up, smiled, and reached out her hand. Not for Aaron, not yet, but for the dog. They say dogs don't understand words, but that dog looked up then, slowly, with tired eyes, and licked the baby's hand, and then Aaron's, and laid his head back down. In that moment, everything changed. The town didn't just rebuild after that storm. They remembered, they painted murals, they told the story in the paper, but most of all, they started seeing the strays, the forgotten, the ones who had been invisible before. But this isn't where the story ends either, because the floodwaters were still rising that night, and the next storm, even worse, was already coming down the river. Some stories are meant to be short, to live and die within the span of a headline or a photograph, but this one, the story of a baby and a nameless dog in the middle of a historic flood, didn't end in the rescue boat or in the warmth of that high school gym, because the water hadn't stopped rising. Storm hadn't truly passed, and neither had the questions. The ones that whispered late at night when the wind quieted just enough for people to remember what they'd lost, what they almost lost, and what they still might lose. And if you're still watching this, if your heart's still holding on, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because some stories, like this one, are best shared when you feel less alone, when you know someone else is watching too. Someone else is holding their dog a little tighter tonight. The baby Lily was doing better now. Her fever had passed. The nurses said her body temperature had stabilized, thanks to that soaked towel and the warmth of the dog, who refused to leave her side, and Erin, her mother, hadn't let go of her, once since she found her, except to gently wrap a fleece around the dog who had saved her daughter's life. A gesture so small but filled with more love than any words could hold. and the dog, though shivering and exhausted, accepted it quietly, resting beside them as if he'd always belonged there. And in a way, maybe he had. They named him River, not because it was original, but because it was honest, because he came out of that river like a secret gift. And because every time Erin said the name, she remembered that moment she turned the corner and saw her baby alive. Saw her baby smiling, and River soaked and muddy and breathing slow. Like the weight of the world had finally let go of his shoulders. But River's story didn't start there either. Not really. And maybe that's why what happened next felt like more than just chance. 'Cause the second storm wasn't just nature's anger. It was a test, a reckoning, a closing of the circle. For a dog who had already lost everything once before, you see, long before the storm hit, before Lily was born, before Erin had ever taken that waitress job or rented that little leaning house on Walnut Street, River had another name, another family, a boy with freckles and a laugh that sounded like summer, a farm just outside town where the grass grew taller than River's ears in May, and a barn that smelled like hay and old tools and the kind of peace you don't appreciate until it's gone. And on that farm, River had slept at the foot of that boy's bed every night for 3 years. Until the day the truck swerved on the gravel road and everything changed, and the boy didn't come home, and the family broke into pieces that didn't fit together anymore. And River was forgotten, left behind when the father moved, when the mother turned to silence, and the aunt, who tried to help, couldn't take a dog too. So River wandered, first to the edge of town, then into it, living on scraps and kindness and instinct, but never forgetting the boy. Never sleeping as peacefully, never trusting quite the same, until Lily, until that basket, until something inside him woke up again. Something that said, "Not this time, not again, not on my watch." And so when the second storm came, rolling in from the south just 2 days after the first, darker and colder and faster, the town wasn't ready, not emotionally, not physically. The levees already weakened, the ground still soaked, and the people already scattered, but River was ready somehow, as if he could smell it, as if he could feel it in his paws. In the way the air tasted metallic and the birds had vanished from the trees, Erin tried to keep calm, to believe the radio announcer who said it might just miss them, that it might shift east. But the way River paced, the way he stood at the window and stared at the clouds like he remembered them, told her otherwise. And when the sirens came again, this time earlier, this time frantic, she didn't hesitate. She scooped up Lily, strapped her to her chest, grabbed River's blanket, and ran, joining the line of evacuees heading toward the church at the top of the hill, the only place high enough to escape what was coming. But halfway there, on a washed-out road littered with branches and the detritus of fear, they heard a cry, faint and high, not Lily's, not even a child's, but human, lost, and panicked. And River froze, ears forward, body low, then bolted left down a side path choked with debris. Erin hesitated, torn between the safety of the hill and the pull of that bark, the call that Look River gave her, not asking permission, but asking trust, and something in her, something that remembered what it felt like to find her baby alive because of him, let her follow. And there, in the back of an overturned pickup truck, water rising fast, was a woman trapped, pinned by the crushed metal, bleeding from her forehead, her foot wedged under the dashboard, eyes wide and full of pain, and beside her, barely breathing, was a small dog, limp, covered in mud. Its chest rising so faintly, Erin thought it had already passed, but River knew better. River jumped first, climbed the slick tailgate, pressed his body into the truck like he belonged there, and began barking, loud and sharp. Not out of fear, but instruction. And Erin, heart racing, handed Lily to a passing stranger on higher ground. "Please," she said, "please get her to the church," and climbed in after him, using her elbows to shimmy toward the woman, who was barely conscious now, whispering something about her husband, her daughter. She didn't know where they were. And Erin, with trembling fingers, unwedged her. Foot hoisted her up, dragging her inch by inch toward the door, while River pushed with his chest, nudging the other dog toward the exit too, even as the water began to lap at the seats. They made it out seconds before the truck was pulled deeper, the current ripping at their clothes, the wind screaming louder than before. But they were out, and the woman, clutching her tiny dog, whispered, "You saved me," and Aaron said, "No, he did," and pointed to River, who was already scanning the trees again, looking for more, as if he knew there were still others, still lives to touch, still souls to find before the storm gave up. They all made it to the church, eventually soaked and sobbing. And Lily was there, safe, still warm, her hands reaching toward the sky like she knew something bigger was holding her now. And River lay beside her again, tired but watchful, and the storm raged outside, but inside there was peace. Because now the town knew his name, and more than that, they knew his heart. There are moments in life when a single act, done without the expectation of applause or reward, ripples out further than anyone could ever imagine, like a stone tossed into the stillest part of a lake, the waves reaching places no one's looking at, and that's what River had done. Not once but twice, not to be seen, not to be remembered, but simply because something inside him refused to stay still when someone else needed saving, and now, with the second storm subsiding and the town clinging to what little hadn't been torn away, people were beginning to notice that the most heroic soul among them didn't wear boots or a badge or carry a radio. He wore mud and silence and eyes full of something too old for words. And if you're still watching this, if your heart's still holding on, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Because there's something in this story that wants to reach all the way into whatever room you are in, to sit beside you the way River sat beside Lily. Just to remind you there's still good in the world, still selfless love that doesn't need to speak to be understood. The morning after the second storm passed, when the clouds finally pulled back like curtains revealing a sun no one trusted yet, the town emerged from its shelters, blinking into the new world, one where the grocery store was a skeleton, where the old clock tower was missing its top, where streets had become rivers and parks had become lakes. But also a world where no one would ever again walk past a stray dog without wondering, just for a second, what heart might be hidden behind those quiet eyes, because River had changed something, not just in Aaron or Lily or the woman from the truck, but in everyone who had watched him leap, swim, push, lead, rescue, guard, and refuse to leave even when his body begged him to rest. And in those first hours of rebuilding, when families began sweeping out water and setting up folding chairs, in front yards just to talk again, his name was everywhere, not spoken like a celebrity, but like an anchor, a reminder of what survived. The mayor, a stern woman named Dolores who had once said she didn't trust animals that wandered, was the first to make it official, calling a press gathering on the steps of City Hall, or what was left of it, and with a trembling voice that cracked mid-sentence, declared that River would be awarded the town's highest civilian honor, as something usually reserved for war heroes and retired firefighters. And though River didn't understand the clapping or the camera flashes or why someone placed a medal around his neck that nearly touched the ground, he stood quietly beside Aaron, his fur cleaner now, his ribs less visible, and looked out at the crowd as if to say, "This is nice, but I've got more work to do." The vet who examined him that day said he had injuries no one had seen before, deep bruising along his chest from where he'd slammed into the basket, torn paw pads from climbing sharp debris, and an older wound along his side, long since. Healed over? Likely from before the storm? From his life before anyone knew his name? And yet the vet said he was the calmest dog she'd ever touched. Never flinched, never growled, just looked at her with those same eyes that seemed to say, "I'll be fine, just take care of the baby." And they did. Lily was thriving now, growing faster than anyone expected, her tiny body responding to love and warmth like a flower does to sunlight. Everywhere she went, River followed, no longer a shadow, but a presence, still quiet, still gentle, but fully hers now, sleeping at the foot of her crib at night, walking beside her stroller during the day, and whenever she cried, it was his nose she reached for first. His ears she clutched when she didn't understand something, and sometimes, in the quietest moments, she'd just sit beside him on the porch and babble in that baby way. And he'd listen, head tilted as if he knew every word. But the town hadn't forgotten the others either. The woman from the truck had recovered. Slowly, her foot still in a brace, but her heart repaired in ways doctors couldn't measure. And the little dog she nearly lost now slept curled beside her every night, a mirror of river in miniature, and every Thursday, she'd bring peanut butter treats and sit on the porch with Aaron and Lily. The four of them forming something like a family no one expected but everyone needed. Schools reopened in church basements. The diner ran out of a food truck. People began planting again. Not because they were ready, but because it was time, and in every mural, every chalk drawing, every child's crayon sketch hung on the temporary community boards, there was always a dog, sometimes golden, sometimes scruffy, sometimes with a basket or a baby or just a tail mid-wag, but always there, always watching, always brave. A film crew from a national network came, trying to make a special out of the story, but left after 2 days when they realized the town didn't want fame. It's just peace, just healing. And when they asked Erin what she thought of River being called a hero, she looked down at Lily, who was asleep in her arms, and said quietly, "He's not a hero. He's just good." And River, lying nearby with his head on his paws, didn't even look up, as if he knew there was nothing left to prove. But there was one more moment still to come, one more ripple in the water that no one saw coming. And it began with a letter, one soaked in rain, edges curled, found wedged in the branches of a fallen tree by a cleanup volunteer 2 miles outside town, sealed in a plastic bag, addressed not to anyone in particular, but marked with 2 words in shaky handwriting. For him. Inside was a photo, old and faded, of a boy with freckles and a golden puppy curled in his lap, and on the back, a name, Buddy. Take care of him if I can't. And suddenly, Erin knew. She brought the photo to River, held it out, and waited, not expecting anything. Not knowing if dogs remember like we do, but River leaned forward, sniffed once, then again, and let out a soft sound. Not a whine, not a bark, but something in between, like the sound of a memory waking up. And that night, for the first time since the storm, River climbed onto the bed instead of the floor, curled beside Lily and Erin, and slept without flinching, without twitching, just breathing slow and deep, as if he'd finally come home. This story still has one more part, one more test, one more miracle, in a moment that no one who saw it will ever forget. There are stories that fade when the rain stops, stories that belong to a season, to a headline, to a moment we replay once and then forget. But then there are stories like River's, stories that dig their roots into you, that bloom quietly. Long after the storm has passed, stories that become a part of the way you see the world. The way you treat the dog sleeping at your feet. The way you slow down to look twice at the muddy paws crossing your path. And if you're still watching this now, still holding space in your heart for what began with a baby in a basket and a dog no one claimed, tell us, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Because this last chapter, the final piece of this story, is not one of sorrow, but of legacy. Of one final moment that proved once and for all that loyalty does not ask for attention, and love, the truest kind, does not need a name. The floodwaters had gone by then, the broken streets patched enough for bikes again. The church parking lot returned to potluck Sundays and laughter, and Lily had grown, her legs stronger, her grip tighter, her first steps taken not toward her mother but toward River, who waited patiently on the rug, tail thumping once, then twice, as she wobbled forward and collapsed against him in a giggle. And Erin, watching from the kitchen with her hand over her mouth, smiled through tears, knowing she was witnessing something holy in its simplicity. River had become the town's silent compass, his presence grounding the community, his gentle demeanor easing the nervous children who still flinched at thunder, his quiet loyalty calming veterans who came to sit beside him like pilgrims at a shrine, and even the mayor, who had once believed dogs were meant for leashes and kennels, now left bowls of water outside City Hall every morning, just in case River passed by. No one knew exactly how old he was. No vet could guess with confidence. But there was a slowness to his movement now, a stiffness in the mornings, a deeper sleep that was harder to wake from. And Aaron noticed it first, the way he struggled to climb stairs, the way his breath hitched after long walks. And though her heart ached, she said nothing. Only wrapped him tighter at night and whispered thank you more often than she ever had before. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you for saving me. Then, one October afternoon, as the leaves curled and the air began to sharpen, the town gathered for its first post-storm harvest festival, a celebration not of survival, but of return, of resilience. And with hayrides and music and tables overflowing, with pie and cider and hand-knit blankets for sale, and Aaron brought Lily, now walking with confidence, and River, wearing a faded bandana and eyes full of quiet joy, and the three of them moved through the crowd like a single being, like a memory, made real. But life, like the river, does not stay still. And as the sun dipped low and the music swelled and laughter echoed off the rebuilt storefronts, a scream tore through the warmth, sharp, panicked, a mother's voice, and all heads turned toward the riverbank, where a boy, no older than 4, had slipped from the edge, chasing a red balloon that danced just out of reach, and had fallen into the shallows, his head disappearing once, then twice, his arms flailing as the current pulled him under faster than anyone could react. People ran, but the river was closer to him than they were, and in that instant, before anyone else moved, before words could form, River was already running. Not fast, not the way a young dog sprints, but with certainty, with a strength that came from something deeper than muscle, with memory. He leaped from the bank without hesitation, his paws cutting the water in perfect rhythm, his chest rising and falling like it had the day he'd found Lily, and in a moment that felt suspended in time. He reached the boy, grabbed the hood of his jacket in his jaws, and began paddling back, one stroke at a time. The boy coughing, sputtering, clutching at River's fur with terrified hands, and when they reached the bank, when Aaron and 3 others pulled them both to safety, everyone watched as River collapsed. Not unconscious, not broken, but tired deeply. Profoundly tired, the kind of tired that comes after you've given every ounce of what you are. And Aaron dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered, "It's okay now. You did it," and Lily, now old enough to know his name, knelt beside him and said, "You're my brave boy," and kissed his nose. River lived 5 more months, peaceful ones, with warm blankets and belly rubs and long naps under the sun, with Lily's hands always nearby and Aaron's voice always close. And when the day came that he didn't wake up, it was Lily who found him, and she didn't cry at first, just lay beside him, her tiny fingers resting on his back, her breath slow and steady, and said, "He's still here, Mama, just sleeping different now." They buried him beneath the willow tree behind the house, the one that had survived both storms, with a stone carved simply, "River, the one who saved us," and every year the town gathers there on the anniversary of the flood, not to mourn, but to remember, to bring their dogs and their babies and their stories, to light lanterns and tell newcomers about the day a stray dog changed everything. And even now, when thunder rumbles and the rain begins to fall, some say you can hear paws on wet earth, moving steady, moving strong, towards someone in need. So, the next time you see a dog sleeping on the side of the road, or staring into the wind like he knows something you don't, look again, just a little closer, because he might not have a name, but he might still have a purpose. Dog do the same for you? Let us know in the comments, and if you're reading this with your dog nearby, give them a hug from all of us. This story wasn't about loss, it was about love, the kind that swims upstream, that leaps without thinking, that stays until the very end.